So, have you ever noticed prices creeping up on your everyday goods? Or maybe wondered how these big global events actually connect down to, your local economy?
It's a fair question. It often feels like these things are happening way over there, doesn't it?
Exactly. It can seem like a puzzle. But today, we're going to unpack something, well, a bit surprising. How a policy like tariffs, something that seems distant, can actually ripple right into your wallet.
hmm And directly impact the livelihood of, say, a small business just down the street for you.
Right. It's easy to think of trade policy as, I don't know, abstract, far removed.
Definitely. But what we're seeing now is, well, it's a very concrete example of just how linked everything really is.
And that's exactly what we want to explore today. Our mission here is to take a deep dive into the recent U.S. tariffs on imports from India.
Yeah, we're going to try and unpack the real impact. It's multifaceted, really, especially on U.S. small businesses.
And crucially, what it all means for you, the consumer. We've pulled together insights from quite a few detailed reports and industry analyses to get the clearest possible picture.
And here's a stat that really jumps out, something that makes this so relevant. Did you know that a staggering 97% of U.S. importers are actually small businesses?
97%. That's huge.
It is. So this isn't just some issue for massive corporations. It's hitting your local shops, the online retailers you use.
And potentially, yeah, the availability and cost of things you buy every single day. We'll show you how that connection works.
Okay.
So let's start with the core problem, how these tariffs become a direct financial hit. It's essentially an unseen tax, isn't it?
That's a good way to put it. Because the key thing to understand is that tariffs aren't paid by foreign governments, despite some assumptions.
Right. They're paid first by the U.S. importers.
Exactly. And for small businesses, that upfront tax payment, it just triggers this cascade of, well, negative financial effects.
And a critical aspect of this is just how vulnerable small businesses are, right?
Yeah.
Because most operate on such thin profit margins.
Razor thin, often.
Yeah.
Which makes them acutely sensitive, really sensitive, to any cost increase.
And the numbers show that, don't they?
They do. Our sources are reporting cost spikes anywhere from 10% to 20% for many small businesses just due to this current tariff environment.
Wow. That's a huge bite out of already lean operations.
It really is.
And it's not just about that direct tariff payment itself, is it? It's like a ripple effect of rising costs across the board.
Absolutely. Even if a small business doesn't directly import from India, say, their domestic suppliers might.
Ah, okay. So those suppliers then pass on their own tariff-related increases because maybe their materials or components are affected further up the chain.
Precisely. And beyond those increased vendor rates, you've got tariffs creating friction all through the supply chain.
Friction like what? Delays?
Yeah, delays in customs processing, which then leads to higher shipping fees, unexpected surcharges. It all adds up.
And I guess for businesses dealing internationally, there's currency shifts too.
That's another layer. Volatility in foreign exchange markets, often kicked off by these kinds of policy shifts, can significantly drive up costs for international transactions.
It sounds like it creates the sort of economy of uncertainty, like businesses just can't plan ahead confidently.
That's a perfect description. These unpredictable trade policies create what one source called a whiplash effect.
Whiplash effect, meaning?
Meaning companies are constantly forced to react. Sudden shifts happen, and they have to scramble. Instead of being able to proactively strategize or, say, invest in growth, it diverts time and resources.
Okay, so shifting focus a bit to the supply chain stress itself. What really stood out in the research was how uniquely vulnerable small business supply chains are.
Yeah, that was striking. We learned that 95% of U.S. companies with, get this, just 1 to 19 employees.
Tiny businesses, basically.
Right. They rely on 4 or fewer import partner countries. 4 or fewer.
So not much diversification there.
Not at all. So when a key partner like India gets hit with tariffs, the impact for these smaller players is immediate, and it's highly concentrated.
That concentration means the logistical burden just flows straight down the line, doesn't it?
Exactly. You can almost visualize it. Step 1, a 25% tariff gets imposed.
Okay.
Step 2, the U.S. importer has to pay that tax up front, right out of pocket.
Right, hitting cash flow.
Then you get the supply chain delays, the fee hikes we mentioned, then add increased administrative burdens, more paperwork, more customs hassle.
And the end result is the small business faces disruption and just higher costs all around. It's a complex chain reaction.
Very much so. And this brings up a really important point, something called the de minimis exception.
Ah, yes. What about smaller shipments? That used to allow duty-free imports under a certain value, right? Like $800.
Exactly. But the suspension of that exception adds a significant administrative load for small businesses, even for tiny frequent imports.
So imagine the paperwork and hassle for every small item now, even like a single prototype or a replacement part.
That's it. It adds friction and cost, even on the small stuff.
Which inevitably, I guess, brings us to the consumer dilemma. Because ultimately, these tariff costs, they have to go somewhere, and usually they get passed on to you, the consumer.
That's typically how it works, yes. Analyses are projecting price increases of around 1.8% in the short term.
1.8% might not sound like a lot, but what does that translate to for a household?
Well, the estimate is a loss of about $2,400 in income per U.S. household. That's a real impact on your budget.
Definitely. And how are consumers reacting? Are people willing to pay more?
It's mixed. Our sources show that while maybe over half of consumers, about 54%, say they'd pay up to 10% more for U.S.-made goods.
Okay, some willingness there.
Some. But brand loyalty seems to evaporate pretty quickly beyond that 10% mark. And a really significant number, 88% of Americans, say they would change their shopping behavior if prices for essential goods rise.
How would they change? Just buy less?
Seeking cheaper alternatives, cutting back on purchases, yeah. Basic price sensitivity kicking in.
And this also has a more subtle impact on our markets, too, doesn't it? Beyond just price.
It does. Tariffs can kind of diminish market vitality. They reduce product choices, for one.
Right. If certain imports become unprofitable, they just vanish from the shelves or online stores.
Exactly. And it can subtly stifle innovation. Businesses get so preoccupied with survival, just making ends meet.
That they shift focus away from longer-term R&D.
Precisely. Survival mode trumps innovation when costs spike unexpectedly.
So zooming out a bit, this isn't just about economics, is it? There's a human cost here. Employment.
Absolutely. And we've seen a direct impact there. The data shows 366,000 jobs lost in micro-businesses. Remember, those are firms with fewer than 10 employees.
Since when?
Since President Trump took office. That represents about a 3% employment drop, specifically for these very small firms.
And that 3% drop, it sounds small maybe, but for those businesses and their communities.
It's huge. The insight here is that their lean operations, their limited financial buffers make them incredibly sensitive. A 3% drop ripples out widely through local economies.
And what kind of impact does all this uncertainty have on the labor market overall? Does it change how businesses hire?
Oh, absolutely. It fosters what some call a low hire, low fire labor market.
Meaning
the pervasive uncertainty makes businesses across the country hesitant. They pause hiring plans. It reduces new job opportunities for everyone, not just in the directly affected firms.
So it's clear then, small businesses are facing a really unique set of challenges compared to, say, larger corporations in this environment.
They really are. And what's crucial to grasp here is the competitive disadvantage this creates.
How so?
Well, small businesses just don't have the same resources. Larger competitors often have more diversified production locations. They have greater negotiating power with suppliers.
And deeper pockets, right? More financial reserves to absorb these kinds of shocks.
Exactly. So this widens the competitive gap between large and small firms. And potentially that can lead to market consolidation, where fewer, bigger players end up dominating.
Okay, so let's dive into some specific sector spotlights now to see how these impacts are playing out on the ground. Pharmaceuticals, for instance. Critically reliant on India, you said.
Incredibly so. India supplies nearly 47% of U.S. pharmaceutical needs. That includes essential generics and also APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. The core stuff.
Almost half. Wow, so a 25% tariff there? What's the impact?
It means rising drug prices, almost certainly, and potentially actual shortages. We're talking about things like life-saving oncology drugs, antibiotics, treatments for chronic diseases.
And finding alternatives isn't quick, I imagine.
Not at all. The estimate is it could take 3 to 5 years to find and approve alternatives. So this raises really serious public health and even national security questions.
Okay, let's switch gears. Textiles and apparel. India's textile sector, you mentioned, is mostly small businesses itself.
That's right. About 80% micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs. So the tariff hits their smaller businesses hard, too.
And for U.S. buyers.
Well, the 25% tariff makes Indian textiles roughly 7–10% more expensive than competitors, like those from Vietnam or China.
So buyers are already reacting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Reports indicate U.S. buyers are already putting new orders on hold, looking to shift their sourcing elsewhere.
Another sector, gems and jewelry. These are often discretionary purchases, right? Not essentials.
Exactly, which makes them very sensitive to price hikes. The U.S. market is huge for India here, nearly 30%, over $10 billion of India's global trade in gems and jewelry.
So a 25% tariff is painful.
Very. Sources in the industry said even a 10% tariff was difficult to absorb. So 25%. Consumers are highly likely to just reduce spending.
Leading to revenue drops, potential business closures for jewelry stores, importers here in the U.S.
That's the expected consequence, yes. Significant declines.
And what about the tech side? Electronics, machinery parts?
Yeah, these are vital components. The U.S. imports a lot of telecom and electrical components from India, things essential for our phone networks, internet infrastructure, even parts used in domestic manufacturing.
So tariffs here don't just affect the price of, say, a finished phone.
No, it goes deeper. It brings up a critical point. Tariffs on these foundational components can actually disrupt our digital infrastructure.
Meaning higher input costs for U.S. businesses and IT services, manufacturing?
Right. It could ripple through the entire digital economy, affecting far more than just traditional tech hardware companies.
Okay, one more sector, seafood, specifically shrimp. India is a big source.
A major source. The U.S. accounts for 40% of India's total shrimp exports. That was worth about $4.8 billion in fiscal year 24.
40%. So a lot of the shrimp we eat.
A huge amount. The impact here is pretty direct. Higher prices for U.S. consumers at the fish counter or in restaurants.
And pressure on U.S. small businesses, too, like restaurants, retailers.
Absolutely. They face that classic dilemma. Absorb the higher costs, which hits their margins, or raise prices and risk losing customers.
Okay, so faced with all these challenges, the costs, the uncertainty, the supply chain mess, how are small businesses adapting? What's in their toolkit for resilience?
Well, first up is supply chain optimization. That sounds fancy, but it means really digging in.
Like what?
Meticulously examining which products are affected, quantifying the cost impact, and then actively exploring alternatives. That could mean domestic suppliers or looking for suppliers in non-tariff countries.
But diversification isn't always easy, is it?
No, not at all. While it sounds like the obvious solution, there are real hurdles. You might find fragmented supplier bases elsewhere, maybe inconsistent quality, new logistical problems.
Intellectual property concerns, maybe?
That too. And the costs of reshoring, actually bringing production back to the U.S., can be very high.
So it takes real effort.
It does. Small businesses really need to, as one source put it, turn on their entrepreneurial gene to navigate this complex landscape.
Okay, what else? Adaptive pricing models.
Right. Businesses have options here. They could add a temporary surcharge that's transparent. Customers see the tariff costs separately. Or they could incorporate the costs into a general price increase. That's simpler for the business, perhaps, but maybe less clear for the customer.
And communication is key here, I imagine.
Crucial. Clear, honest, frequent communication with customers, explaining why prices are rising, maybe highlighting the quality or uniqueness of their product to justify it.
Makes sense. What about internal operations, efficiency?
Absolutely vital. Businesses need to review their operations, find areas to streamline, cut non-essential expenses. Every penny counts when margins are squeezed.
And negotiating harder with suppliers?
Yes, smarter negotiations. Proactively engaging suppliers. Can we share the cost burden somehow? Can we get better payment terms, maybe bulk discounts if possible?
And on the financial side, planning must be critical.
Non-negotiable. Robust financial planning. This means leveraging things like business lines of credit for liquidity, managing cash flow very diligently.
Anything else on the financial front? Contracts.
Good point. Reviewing contracts is essential. Look for force majeure clauses. These sometimes offer relief during unforeseen events, which could potentially include sudden large tariff increases.
Interesting. And finally, what about changing the product itself?
That's another avenue. Product evolution. Can we substitute imported materials with domestic alternatives, even if it changes the product slightly?
Or if price increases are just unavoidable?
Then it comes back to justifying them by really emphasizing superior quality, maybe innovation, the long-term value the customer is getting.
So, given all this pressure and the need for adaptation, what about government support? Is it enough? Is it helpful?
Well, there are programs out there. There's the USITC Trade Remedy Assistance Program, TRAO, it's often called.
And what does that do?
It offers technical and legal assistance to help small businesses navigate complex trade laws, which can be useful.
Okay. And the SBA, the Small Business Administration.
They also have various loan programs, the 7A, 504, microloans, export loans. These are designed to provide things like working capital or funds for fixed assets.
But Is it hitting the mark for these specific challenges?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It makes you wonder. While these programs exist, evaluations of similar support programs often show, let's say, mixed effects on actual employment and wages.
And are they really tailored for businesses struggling with import tariffs?
That seems to be a gap. The accessibility and appropriateness for businesses specifically facing import tariff challenges might be limited. Many programs tend to focus more on helping businesses export or supporting purely domestic production.
Not necessarily direct relief for businesses whose models depend heavily on imports.
Exactly. And some sources suggest recent policy changes might even make accessing some of these funds more challenging for businesses already struggling with tariff impacts. So the reality check is they exist, but uptake and suitability might be limited.
Okay, let's step back again and look at the broader context. What are economists saying about the overall impact?
Well, the consensus among many economists we looked at is not great for the U.S., actually. They project these tariffs will likely have more substantial negative implications for the United States than for India.
Like what specifically?
Reduced U.S. GDP growth, increased inflation, potentially keeping it above the Federal Reserve 2% target until at least 2026, maybe longer.
And the dollar?
A potentially weakening dollar as well, which really does beg the question you hear sometimes. Are these tariffs a kind of self-inflicted wound for the U.S. economy?
And what are industry groups saying, the ones representing these businesses?
They're sounding the alarm pretty consistently. Major associations, the National Retail Federation, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the National Small Business Association, the NFIB.
A lot of big names there.
Yes, and their message is unified. They're reporting that tariffs are causing economic insecurity, rising costs, pervasive uncertainty, and having a, quote, devastating impact on small businesses right across the nation.
Meanwhile, what's India's strategic response? Are they just taking this?
Oh, no, not at all. India isn't just reacting passively. They're actively pursuing initiatives like Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means self-reliant India.
So boosting their own domestic production.
Exactly. And crucially, they're also diversifying their export markets, looking beyond traditional Western economies towards the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, building new trade relationships.
And the implication of that is?
Well, the sort of surprising truth, or maybe the long-term reality check here, is that even if these U.S. tariffs were removed tomorrow, the historical advantages the U.S. enjoyed, like easy access to low-cost, readily available imports from India, might diminish over time anyway because of these strategic shifts by India.
So U.S. businesses need a long-term supply chain strategy regardless of the tariffs, one that anticipates this changing landscape.
Precisely. They can't just assume things will snap back to how they were. A proactive long-term strategy is becoming essential.
Okay, let's try to sort of unpack all of this as we wrap up. We've explored how these tariffs on Indian imports create this really complex web of challenges for U.S. small businesses.
Yeah, from squeezed profits and major supply chain headaches to higher prices hitting you, the consumer, and even tangible job losses.
But we've also seen how this pressure, paradoxically maybe, can spur opportunities. It forces businesses to become more resilient, more efficient.
Right. Building that entrepreneurial gene you mentioned.
Exactly. The long-term outlook, though, it seems to point towards continued inflationary pressures and just a more dynamic, maybe more expensive global sourcing landscape overall.
So agility, adaptability, these aren't just buzzwords anymore.
No, they're really becoming core competencies, essential for survival and growth, especially for the smaller players who have less margin for error.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? As a consumer, as a citizen, understanding these interconnected forces feels pretty crucial, doesn't it? It really does. This deep dive shows us that trade policy isn't just some abstract economic model playing out on spreadsheets.
No, it's about real people, real businesses, your local community, and the choices we all make every day, even in what we buy.
Perhaps this raises an important question for you to think about. How does your own purchasing power impact this whole picture of global trade?
And maybe what role do you think policy should play in trying to balance national interests with the health of small businesses and ultimately consumer well-being? Something to consider.
Specifically, that recent 25% tariff on Indian imports and what it means for U.S. small businesses.
Yeah, it's a big one. The sources you've shared paint a complex picture.
Exactly. Our mission today is to go beyond just the headlines, using those sources to see how these policies aren't just about prices. They're causing really a systemic shock.
And small businesses are particularly vulnerable here. Thin margins, not a lot of backup suppliers.
Let's start there. A lot of people think tariffs are paid by foreign companies, right? But that's not quite how it works.
Not at all. It's a tax, plain and simple, paid by the U.S. company importing the goods. Your sources show costs jumping 10, even 20% for small businesses.
Ouch. And that eats directly into profits that are already slim.
Precisely. And zooming out, that burden doesn't just stay with the business. It largely gets passed on. Estimates suggest a short-term hit of maybe $2,400 per U.S. household. And it acts like a regressive tax, essentially. It hits lower-income households harder, proportionally speaking.
That's a huge impact. But it's not just the tariff itself, is it? What other financial pressures are piling on?
Oh, definitely not just the tariff. We're seeing operational costs go up all over. Think higher vendor rates, increased shipping fees, customs charges are climbing. Even currency fluctuations can suddenly make international spending much more expensive.
And I read something about the de minimis rule changing.
Yes, that's another layer. That $800 duty-free exception for small shipments.
Yeah.
Suspended. So now, even tiny imports mean more paperwork, more administrative hassle, more cost.
It sounds like a constant barrage. You mentioned vulnerability. How does this play out in the supply chain?
This is where that systemic shock idea really lands. Small businesses often rely heavily on just a few import partners.
How heavily?
Well, get this. 95% of companies with, say, 1 to 19 employees, they depend on 4 fewer countries for their imports.
95%.
Yeah. So when a major low-cost source like India gets hit with a 25% tariff, it creates what the sources call an outsized burden. They just don't have easy alternatives.
An outsized burden, absolutely. And our deep dive highlighted a couple of sectors where this is especially, well, intense. Pharmaceuticals was one.
Hugely important. India supplies nearly 47% of U.S. generic drugs and crucial active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs.
Okay, so what does a 25% tariff mean there?
It could mean drug price hikes, obviously, but also potential shortages. We're talking critical medicines, oncology drugs, antibiotics.
But if finding other sources isn't quick.
Not at all. Building up the scale and quality needed elsewhere, that could take 3 to 5 years, easily. It shifts from an economic issue to a public health concern fast.
Okay, so critical goods like medicine are hit hard. What about things that are more discretionary? Gems and jewelry also came up.
Right, a very different sector, but also feeling the pinch. These are items people choose to buy, not need to buy. So a 25% tariff there is described as steep. It's really tough for businesses to just absorb that cost on luxury or non-essential goods.
So they either raise prices significantly or
see demand drop off. Probably a bit of both. It directly hits their sales volume.
all these impacts costs, supply chains, demand. What does this translate to for jobs, especially in those small businesses?
The numbers are concerning. Your sources point to about a 3% decline. That's around 366,000 jobs lost specifically in the very smallest firms, fewer than 10 employees. This has been tracked since the current administration took office.
366,000 jobs. That's significant.
It really is. These aren't just statistics. They're often family businesses, community pillars, and tariffs just stack the deck against them further. They don't have the scale, the cash reserves, or the multiple production sites that larger corporations do to weather these storms.
So pulling back for a wider view, how are economists seeing these tariffs affecting the whole U.S. economy beyond just the small business sector?
The consensus seems to be quite negative for the U.S., actually. Projections show potential hits to GDP, rises in inflation, more so potentially than the impact on India's economy.
Really? So it backfire?
Some are calling it a self-inflicted wound. Meanwhile, India isn't standing still. They've got their Make in India push, and they're actively diversifying where they sell their goods.
Interesting. A strategic shift.
Yeah, it suggests a potential long-term move away from relying too heavily on Western markets. Reshaping future trade patterns, maybe.
Okay, so let's recap. For U.S. small businesses, the challenges are stark. Rising costs, major supply chain headaches, and just this huge pressure to somehow adapt.
It's a tough environment, no doubt.
But, there's maybe a paradoxical flip side. Sources suggest this kind of pressure forces businesses to scrutinize everything, find efficiencies they might have ignored before, a forced reevaluation, perhaps?
That's true. Adversity can sometimes spur innovation or necessary changes. It compels a hard look at the business model.
So thinking about all these layers, the costs, the supply chains, the global shifts, it leads to a final thought for you, our listener.
Given these complexities, how does your own view of global trade and supply chains change when a policy like tariffs can reshape not just price tags, but the actual resilience and strategic direction of businesses globally? This deep dive really pushes us to ask, where does true economic strength really come from in such an